Welcome everyone to this very special seminar on Beijing's garbage. As Professor Goldstein just mentioned, he got very excited today to talk about something that is very dear to his heart. And he's also saying, well, how many times do you get to talk about garbage with other people who are also interested in garbage? Yeah, so this is our great pleasure to have Professor Joshua Goldstein and also Mr. Da Mao and also Mr. Shi-yang to be with us today. They each will present their works for about 20-25 minutes, and then we will open the floor for discussion. So let me introduce our first speaker, Professor Joshua Goldstein. He's a professor in the Department of History at University of Southern California. He has done works on the modern history of recycling in Beijing. And he interviewed recycling workers, and he dig into archives about recycling industry and operation during Mao's era as well. And in addition to the history of recycling, Professor Goldstein has a very wide range of interests. He's also interested in Peking opera. So he has done a very substantial book on Beijing opera called Drama Kings, Players and Publics in the Recreation of Peking Opera 1870 to 1937, published by UC Press in 2007. So I will introduce these other two speakers one by one before they start. So let me turn the floor to Professor Goldstein.
Thank you very much for that introduction. That was very kind of you, and I guess I need to open this, is that right? I think, okay. Why am I looking there instead of at the screen in front of me? That would be better. Okay. I want to apologize for the fact that my ideas are going to be really kind of messy today. I'm still trying to formulate what I'm saying here about the history of Beijing garbage and recycling. So if things seem disjointed or that you've missed something, don't worry, it's not you, it's me. I'm also kind of though I should be really good at PowerPoint by this time in my life, I'm actually still not, and so I've tried these new things, and like having bullet points actually rise up and that kind of thing. Also, this is going to be this really lopsided presentation where at the beginning there'll be lots of pictures, and then there's just going to be lots of words on the screen. Basically, the scholarship evaluating the environmental legacy of the Mao years is scant, and I'm not going to be able to provide any serious contribution to it at the moment. There's one major book in English so far weighing in on the matter, and it's Judith Shapiro's Mao's War Against Nature, and the title pretty much tells you where she stands. China's high socialist period was an environmental disaster, and the blame lies squarely with Mao himself. Certainly, there is some evidence for this idea. So this is the kind of the framework that I'm starting out here with. So these are some posters that show you the idea that people will somehow go to war against nature and overcome it to create a socialist industrial utopia. And then you get things like the For Pests campaign, where it's kind of glorifying the massive spraying of insecticides and DDT. Killing the 4 pests, et cetera, knocking the sparrows out of the air with a slingshot. There's lots and lots of, and Shapiro's book has some very strong evidence for this. The Great Leap Forward, we had, the 4 Pests campaign, we had steel smelting in this massive, wasteful amount, right, the backyard steel movement that created massive deforestation. There's all kinds of water control and dam projects that were poorly planned, that were failed, that were quite locally problematic, and other forms of poorly planned industrialization, the Third Front being a very famous example of trying to move cities into the hinterlands to avoid kind of the Soviet threat in the 60s and 70s, and a lot of those urbanization activities were very wasteful and and failures, and of course the refusal, Mao's refusal to face up to the need for birth planning, which is, certainly a lot of population issues can be laid at his feet in that regard. So there's plenty of, it's not that Shapiro's entirely far-fetched, but I suspect that this picture is a bit oversimplified. First, and it might be pinning too much on one person to blame Mao as opposed to a bigger set of political economic forces and decision makers shaping China's planned economy. Though, as I said, I think there are some problems that are traceable to Mao. Secondly, as environmentally irresponsible as many projects and policies may have been in the Mao years, the pace of environmental destruction way back then looks sluggish compared to the incredibly rapid environmental exploitation and degradation that occurred during the miraculous period of reform and growth in the last 30 years. And I think you're surrounded by photographs of the evidence of that. I don't think really hardly any of the pictures that you're seeing here have a legacy that goes back to the 70s. Of course, when we're just talking about municipal solid waste, which is all I'm going to be talking about, and materials management, these are only very small parts of an environmental management picture. But if you talk to veterans who worked in that sector in China, you get quite a different picture of at least one small part of the socialist economic environmental management picture. Again, these people, obviously, being veterans of a system, are biased towards that system, and so I wouldn't say that their picture is entirely correct either. But they present it as much more responsible. Indeed, there is a general sense that a lot of folks have that in the Mao era, nothing went to waste, and that conserving, reusing, and reusing valuable material resources was a central tenet of daily economic behavior, and even key to socialist and, in fact, to Maoist ideology. So I have some other posters that underline this whole story of, being extremely thrifty, not wasting any resources. These are all kind of extolling thrift and repairing things. Don't let anything go to waste. This is, a great book could be written about how to reuse things, the proper uses of things, and then you get little pictures about each different kind of material that can be reused properly in an efficient way. Here's another poster that's very similar to that. I'm sorry, I don't have this one in color, unfortunately. I once did. This one is from a friend, actually, and I've lost the color version of it. All the other ones are easily available on Baidu. Originally, these were posters that were made for propaganda. I'm not sure where they were posted precisely, however. No, so I don't know where they were printed or posted. Some of them are fairly, you'll see reproductions of a lot. Some of them are a little less common. This one is about using shoes and how it can be used to make, the shoe bottoms can be used to make fertilizer. And this is one that I think kind of gets at the Maoist core of it all, right? That, you probably have heard of the whole Lei Feng spirit and the wanting to be a bolt in the great machine of socialism that doesn't move and doesn't rust. And it's very clearly also associated with the idea of conservation, that every little bit counts. And so, and this is maybe a general framework that I'm throwing out to maybe think about the Mao era in terms of its relationship to processes of industrialization, kind of contrast industrialization without consumerism to what we have in the capitalist world, which is industrialization with consumerism, and the different ramifications this has for regimes of waste and scrap processing and that kind of thing. So I'm making this contrast here between this picture and what Shapiro was talking about, and obviously this is a bit of a forced contrast. In many ways, these phenomena could be seen as compatible. Maximizing the use of every scrap of material for industry and exploiting nature to the hilt are entirely compatible concepts. There is nothing to suggest in any of the pictures I just showed you any caution against harmfully polluting the human and non-human environment in any of this kind of pro-thrift propaganda. But there's also not the relentless promotion of consumption that we see in the capitalist economy that propels the frenzy of resource use, which we recode as GDP growth. One way of putting this might be, as I said, that the Mao era was characterized as an industrialization, might be characterized as industrialization without consumerism. And I'm still working on whether that's a helpful concept. So the rest of what I'm going to go over now is all points of no more pictures. It's all kind of points. I'm going to go through two kind of examples from the Mao era of processes related to waste and scrap in Beijing, and some of the successes and failures of them and the kind of contradictions in them, and then hopefully end up with a sense of how this might relate to the future that you'll hear about in a second. Okay, so selected episodes in Beijing's recycling and waste histories. Story 1, experiments in urban cleanup, resource reduction and separation. So the initial cleanup of Beijing that happens in 1950 was a massive campaign that involved the military and the populace and all kinds of stuff. And there's very amazing kind of coordination of and a big conference where everybody stands up and says, I will volunteer 40 trucks and I will volunteer, they moved 490,000 tons of accumulated garbage from the city. And it basically set the tone for a series of these kinds of cleanup movements that will happen for the rest of the socialist era. That every year, during almost every important national holiday, Chunjie, National Day, et cetera, there would be a day or 2 day or 3 day kind of, even a week coordinated campaign of collect the scrap, collect the waste, clean up the city, move everything to where it can be reused or disposed of properly. And this was clearly an important part of the kind of processes they put together. The next bunch of points is that as Beijing then settled into its post-war system, waste obviously didn't just stop being, they didn't clean it all up in one day. So there was a kind of accumulation of waste every year of about 815,000 tons. And 51% of that was coal dust, right? Because the main thing that people did was burn little balls of coal for heat. And 28% was dirt. Some of the dirt was sweepings. The other 28% of the dirt was the dirt that was put into the balls of coal before they were burnt to make them into balls. And then 11% was organic and food waste, and 5 to 7% was recyclable. So people were paying attention to the waste system in Beijing were very smart. They said, we need a campaign to shift from coal briquettes to beehive coal. Beehive coal is the one thing that you're probably familiar with, these little disky things. This stuff was not very common in 1950. They have far less dirt in them. So that basically the thinking was 22% of these briquettes that are round are dirt. That it means that you have to transport it in and then you have to transport it out. All this dirt, it's a huge waste. Let's build a much more efficient burning system that makes a lot less waste. And this will save all kinds of fuel costs and landfill space. But it also means building a kind of new step-by-step kind of household infrastructure where you have the right kind of furnace to burn these little things, which they slowly implemented. And this was obviously one of the big successes in reducing Chinese waste in Beijing. More stuff about source separation, though. So that was a couple of things that worked. These lightning campaigns to clean up the city. The beehive coal campaign was a very successful one. There were also experiments to start with source separation, right, where people in their households separate their waste into different piles and have it moved to different places. And the idea was, mixed waste can't be reused. If there's organic waste including, excrement, but also including food waste, this decomposes and becomes a real health hazard. And there's also a bunch of trash pickers who go around Beijing at this time still, who collect these wastes, and the government did not look kindly upon this either. And you already see these people kind of disparaged in the documents, even though there is also concern to kind of get them out of this job and get them into something better. So there's a bunch of interests in why you want to create source separation. The proposal was that you would use the ash for bricks and building materials. Compost waste would be used for fertilizer. Residents could do their selling of recyclables, glass, kind of pick out the, glass, paper, bone. There was a little bit of metals in there too. Today now it's obviously plastics is joined into that. And you sell this to the municipal company, which they started to put together. I'll talk more about that in a second. Food waste and vegetables from vegetable markets for pigs, and night soil, which was probably the other big form of waste in Beijing, would be used as fertilizer. Problem was, none of this worked, except for selling to the municipal company. Aside from sellable recyclables, residential source separation failed. People, even though the campaigns were fairly strong and whatever, the people did not want to do the dirty work on a daily basis. And as soon as the campaign subsided, the separating stopped. Also, coordinating the collection of and movement of all of these resources around Beijing it was really a kind of logistical headache, and you needed all kinds of spaces to move things to. So what did they do? They came up with this method of mixing household waste with night soil, which was a way that you could kind of easily disinfect the night soil more quickly, also get rid of all of this ash waste, and create some stuff that you could throw down as fertilizer. Unfortunately, it totally degraded the soil. And after about 2 decades of doing this, the peasants in Haidian first and then in Chaoyang basically said, enough, we don't want this stuff. You're destroying our soil quality with it. At which point, the people who were trying to use night soil were bringing it in often improperly and using undisinfected stuff, which created obviously some health hazards in the produce. So what are our conclusions? Aside from materials that could be sold to the recycling company, which I'll talk about in a moment, Beijing's municipal solid waste and night soil were treated as waste to be disposed of rather than reused. And that's kind of where we are when we get to the 1980s and the reform period. Okay. Example number 2 is the scrap industry. All right, I'm going to make a bunch of, I'm going to go through these claims very quickly. These are debatable claims. This is kind of the framework I'm trying to figure out. But basically, I'm pretty much arguing that scrap wastes are materials that defy formal placement and valuation. They are geographically broadly distributed. That I think everybody can understand, right? That like garbage is everywhere. Everybody produces it. It's not like something you mine in one place or that you have in local industry, right? So the biggest headache in kind of managing garbage and scrap is actually the collection side of things, which is exorbitantly expensive in all systems, right? Almost every municipal system that does this kind of work, 80% of the cost is collection and basic sorting. Majority of labor and energy in scrap processing chains involves collection and sorting. Anything called for value is used damage, and a vague provenance, and therefore extremely difficult to create a formal economy out of. Right? It's really hard to start putting price tags and guarantees or any sort of formal market on used goods. What does that mean? Short of building an expensive infrastructure, scrap collection is the purview of the poor. Without subsidies, scrap waste trade rarely profits participants inside a formal system. You have to kind of remain informal in order to make any profit, which means that the scrap trade remains persistently untransparent and resists regulation. And I would say, I could talk about how in like a US or capitalist kind of histories, models of industrialization, when you scale up and when you also get environmental pressures, these force the system to and the state to take more seriously and make less and bring transparency to these activities, but it involves scaling up and all kinds of other activities. Obviously, that's not the path that you go on in 1950 in China. You're going in a somewhat different direction of just wanting the main issue is getting scrap, especially the valuable things like copper, aluminum, and iron and rubber, from these scrap pickers who are usually sending it to handicraft processors and getting it into industrial processing. That's the goal. So Chinese state priorities regarding the scrap sector in the 50s: gain control over vital materials in approximately that order, channel these materials to industrial uses, and also manage the livelihood of the poor people who are involved in these handicraft and picking systems that the legacy you're getting out of the Republican era. There are, probably about 5,000 to 10,000 people, depending on who you count into the system, who make livings in this way, and you need to somehow manage their livelihoods. By the 1960s, the state successfully achieves all 3 goals. So, not bad. These aren't easy things to do. How does the formalization take place? Again, this is kind of a step-by-step, very quick overview. Increasingly tight supervision of the trade, intensive registration of all scrap peddling businesses. That's something that you see all the way back in the Republican era. Basically, the suspicion of anyone who deals in junk, which at this time also goes all the way to antiques and used jewelry. I mean, it's this very big swath of, from scrap paper to old antiques and everybody in between. You've just figured that this is also an entire sector that is ripe for laundering illegal, stolen objects. And so, from the Republican era on, you just want, there's an attempt to kind of register this stuff to make sure that you know what's going where. Then you get an effort to promote government-recognized guilds of various scrap trades. The communists really move on this very strongly in 51, 52, but actually the Kuomintang was already doing it in Chongqing in the 30s. And some of the groups had done it by themselves a little bit in the Republican era as well, but the only city that has a history of the scrap trade that's been written is Chongqing, and they've done a very good job of writing it. And they have documents about all these guilds registering themselves in the Republican era. I haven't found enough of that about Beijing, except for post-49. Consolidate traders into the government corporation. That's what they start doing in 52, beginning with copper, then aluminum. Ferrous comes a little bit later. Rubber comes earlier probably than ferrous. And then set price controls on all goods and clamp down on the violators. And that's where you start weeding everybody out. If you don't join the system, then you're kicked out of the system. If you're a petty trader, et cetera, basically you have to follow the price. The Beijing starts setting price points for every item. And if you violate those price points, you're going to be shut down. And again, success. By the 1960s, most scrap trade is happening within formal parameters. Prices, weights, et cetera, are seen by public as generally reliable, which they never had been in the Republican era. The state system keeps good track of materials at times in painstaking detail. And I mean, I didn't bring any documents with me, but I mean, 25 different types of glass bottle for different kinds of medicine. How many did we produce? How many were sent back? How many, which kind of boxes for which kind of object, et cetera, et cetera. We're about to change from putting popsicles in cardboard crates to putting them in plastic crates. This is the result. So really amazing detail. But inefficiencies and contradictions are fundamental elements of the system. Contradiction number one. Is the recycling company a business with its own interests, or does it serve merely the interests of other industries, right? And you see this kind of thing where there'll be one bureau talking to another saying, or actually within the recycling bureau itself, somebody higher up saying, you down there charged too much money when you sold your metal to that industry, right? In any other industry, it'd be like, wow, good job, man, you made a lot of money. In this system, it's like, how dare you charge the steel mill more for that scrap steel than they should be paying for it, because you're not supposed to profit yourself, you're supposed to make industry grow. How do you work in a bureaucracy where at the one hand you are being evaluated to make some sort of profit and not lose money and be efficient, and on the other hand, they're gonna smack you around every time you make a deal that's actually too good? Contradiction number two, in order to prevent competitive pricing, horizontal trading is prohibited. But horizontal trading is more efficient in almost all cases than moving through a third party, such as the state recycling system, right? I'm a factory with some sort of scrap. Who needs that kind of scrap? Scrap is very picky. It's not like you can just take all kinds of random scrap and throw it everywhere. It's like, I've got this kind of scrap. Who needs it? Somebody out there's I got to find somebody, right? Instead of making a connection directly with another industry, no, that's not allowed. Go through this company, which gets all scrap, which has no specialization really, or some specialization inside it, and then move it. Well, and eventually, sometimes you can kind of create specific connections with one industry and another and kind of bypass, but that all has to be approved and stamped and allowed. Otherwise, what you're doing is not permitted, right? So it's like this very built-in kind of inefficiency to how scrap is gonna move. 3, the social status of workers. This is what the title of the talk gets at. In the waste sector, and recycling company remains terribly low, despite huge propaganda efforts. I think this gets more at contradiction one than anything else. That despite the propaganda about how great it is to be sparing and recycle, et cetera, there is it's clear that this sector is seen as a secondary importance to the important industries that it serves. And so you don't really get very many of the privileges that real industries get. Other problems that pertain to this, scrap is hugely diverse. Technologies and applications of material uses are finicky. Placing all scrap under one bureau undermines technical efficiency. The recycling company has to have a finger in every industry, right? I mean, because all different kinds of scrap and it has to go through them. So there's a lot of overlap. Very particular networks, not flexible. The last one is one that I think if you ever look at there's a history of Hungarian waste by Zsuzsa Gyula, and she writes about this problem. It's a very common problem to the socialist economy in general, that because your resource constraints are, you're always stockpiling stuff just in case you don't get what you need, and so you get this kind of stockpiling in scrap as well, or you get just totally divergent, the signals are not connected. So one signal is like collect, collect, collect. So you make a major collection, but it's like, if you don't have what's the point of collecting a huge amount of some sort of scrap if you don't have a use for it yet? And so stockpiling just happens and it's just in wastes. Okay, so just 2 more slides. Lots of verbiage here. Why are recycling company workers still at the bottom of the social hierarchy? All the rhetoric aside, scrap is a secondary sector. Pay was low, working conditions were poor, and there's, in 77, there's a little explosion of documents that happens kind of at the end of the Mao, Mao's finally dead, and people are starting to get out of this thing, and they're basically just talking about how miserable stuff is in the waste sector, that, nobody can get, like young people in the sector can't find a spouse. No one will marry somebody who does scrap. Out of 30 women who are doing fiber stuff, which is this last thing, right? Fiber and waste paper sorting. Out of 30 of them, 25 of them have some sort of bladder infection, like chronic bladder infections, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really, and the pay is lower than for waste pickers, or for people that street sweepers. I think one reason might be that the marginal value of the sector was reinforced, possibly unintentionally, by making this something that you also did as campaigns that were voluntaristic. The scrap shops and collectors at the local level were only marginally formalized and often made out of unemployed people. So you get this result that people who work in the sector are usually from poor backgrounds, et cetera, and they can't bring new blood into the sector. And something I actually didn't put in here, but it's pretty obvious, is that there's always a suspicion of the scrap sector that continues from the 40s, which is that, basically if you're buying and selling junk, waste, scrap, you are trying to find a way to turn a profit from it. That is really the art of dealing in scrap. Making networks, building connections, finding people who need your specific stuff, and turning a profit from something that looks like it might not be profitable. Obviously, the state has a huge amount of suspicion about those kinds of activities, even though it wants that system to function well, which I think puts it as always kind of a suspect place. So, despite rhetoric celebrating the contributions of recycling, which we just saw in the recycling company workers were among the poorest and most looked down upon of China's urban workers all the way through the 70s. Implications for moving forward. One, the state's recycling system inculcated urbanite habits of diligently collecting recyclables to sell for small cash. And I think anybody who goes to China today in urban areas sees this. I think you don't even have to go to China. You can go to outside of Chinatown in LA and you'll see this. There are people who come from China, older people especially, are very diligent about selling any waste that can be sold. I think some of this you could chalk up to a history of poverty. Some of it you could chalk up to a history of elites not becoming economically elite during the socialist period. So you have these people that you would otherwise in other systems would not care about this kind of stuff, but actually remain caring about it through their middle age. But it's obviously in some ways a very good habit. Source separation and other schemes to manage reuse wastes on a non-remunerative basis all failed. No foundation in residential habits or in municipal planning exist to handle the rapid future growth of the municipal waste stream. And that's the kind of crises that I think Shi-yang is going to be talking about, one little aspect of that sense of like the waste is piling up. The rigidity of the scrap trading and pricing system made for an industry that lacked flexibility to create new networks and was confined by administrative geographies. And so this formal system was, one, unable to accommodate the new small enterprises of the reform era, unable to compete with the informal labor and trading of rural migrant recyclers that come into the cities in the 80s and 90s, prone to see any such trends as unruly, uncivilized, unmodern, et cetera, because basically they did the socialist system did a great job of formalizing the entire sector. And so anything that was informal, anything that was untraceable became immediately suspect and was kind of like the enemy, which leads to everyone to be prone to the characterization of everything outside anything outside itself is illegal. And you see, you know, I won't go into the stuff in the 90s, but if you look at what happened to migrant recyclers in the 90s, the kinds of detentions, beatings, constant harassment that people went through in the 90s when they came into the city to just do waste picking and trading, which changed after Hu Jintao came to power. But the kind of 10 to 15 years of really abuse that migrants went through, I think is obviously closely related to this, labeling everyone outside the system as illegal. Sorry if I went a little long and was a little disjointed. Please welcome questions after and help.
Our next speaker is Shi-yang. Shi-yang is a PhD candidate in geography department, and his research interests include political economy of development, cities, and economic geography. He's currently writing his dissertation and tentatively titled "The City Recycled: The Afterlives of Demolished Buildings in Post-socialist Beijing." So, Shi-yang.
Thank you. So the focus of my presentation today is demolition materials, which refers to objects produced from the demolition of buildings and urban infrastructures. So I intentionally avoid to use the term garbage or waste, and the reason is to emphasize the fact that it is until fairly recently, probably during the early 90s, demolition materials began to appear as a type of waste in writing and in people's everyday conversations. Today, I want to use the case of Beijing to explain how that happened, and I will also discuss the impact of this transformation in Chinese cities and towns. So during the socialist period, various terms were used by officials to refer to demolition materials, and building garbage is not one of those terms. This choice of the terms reflect the fact that officials during the socialist period saw demolition materials as something valuable, or to be more specific, a type of resource that can be used in urban construction. In fact, government in that time actively engaged themselves in the recycling and the reuse of demolition materials. But before I go into the details of how they do that, let me briefly explain why officials come to see demolition material as a resource. So during the 50s and in the early 60s, the newly refounded socialist regime carried out large-scale urban constructions in Beijing. The purpose was to first strengthen the administrative function of the city, as now Beijing had become the capital of China, and second, to remake Beijing from a so-called consumption city to a production city. The most well-known example of urban construction during this period was the creation of Tiananmen Square, where a dozen of huge monumental buildings, which include the People's Congress, of course, were constructed. And one note I want to make here is that a great amount of old buildings were torn down along the Chang'an Dajie, the Chang'an Boulevard. In other words, the construction of the Tiananmen Square initiated the first wave of large urban demolition in the PRC history. In addition to the Tiananmen Square area, the government also built up many factories and workers' houses on the eastern suburb. And also a large number of research institutions and universities were established or expanded in the northwestern suburb. During the first half of the 20th century, because of long-time warfare, first between the Chinese and the Japanese, and then between the communists and nationalists, the development of the construction industry was slow, and the productivity of the industry was very low. Therefore, when large-scale urban construction took place during the 50s and early 60s, there was a constant shortage of construction materials. This shortage can be best illustrated by the widespread phenomena of building deconstruction, where people took apart old building structures in order to get the building material. Many portions of the city wall, for example, were dismantled by resident or even governmental agency and state-owned enterprises who were in need of the wall bricks for construction project. Shortage of construction material created two opposing forces. One was the commodification of demolition materials by residents and by waste dealers. During that time, many people in Beijing found that in between large-scale urban construction and urban demolition, there exists an ample of space for making a profit. They would buy demolition materials from agencies that were demolishing buildings, and then sold the material to other state agencies who were in need. The commodification of demolition materials made urban construction expensive to the state. Thus, in response to it, there was the other force, which is the monopolization of demolition material by the state. There was, first of all, laws and ordinances put in practice to declare state ownership of demolition materials. So in this announcement, for example, the Administration Council mandated that all demolition material from state-owned houses should be handed over to the Bureau of Real Estate in Beijing, and thus the selling of demolition materials by non-state actors become illegal. And secondly, to protect demolition material as state property, government used fences to block access to those to be demolished buildings, and they often made police to patrol the demolition site. It is difficult to know how successful the state monopoly of demolition material was, but we do know that for those demolition materials who fell into the hand of the state, they were mostly controlled by three agencies of the Beijing city government: the Bureau of Real Estate, Department of Urban Planning, and Department of Urban Construction. These three agencies own and manage a large amount of Beijing's building stock and urban infrastructures. And thus, when a building was to be demolished, there were usually a person who decided where those demolition materials should go. To make it easier for me to to make my argument and tell the story, I'm going to call, from now on, I'm going to call them the urban managers. Sorry. In existing official documents, we can identify three types of recycling practices that the urban managers carry out. The first was to conduct a survey about the quantity of building materials for those to be demolished buildings. So this is the Diwang Miao, the Diwang Archway. So before it was demolished, there's a unit called the Department of Cultural Preservation. They make a list of the whole building materials that is contained in this structure, so that they know how much they have, and then they know where it should be sent to. In socialist Beijing, there was no specialized labor force for the building demolition. The second thing that urban managers concerned about, therefore, was the organization of the labor force. Labor force for building demolition usually come from state agencies or workers from state-owned enterprises. But in cases where the to-be demolished building is large in scale, such as a city wall, the urban manager will mobilize residents, such as school teachers and school students, to join building demolition. Last but not least, urban managers made material allocation plans. they will make a list of state agencies who are going to receive demolition materials. At this moment, I do not have the data that will allow me to analyze how allocation decisions were made. For example, why some agencies got the material while others are not. But yet, the simple fact that this kind of list actually exists is surprising, because in today's Beijing, you don't see officials who ever bother to do these kind of things. So through state recycling, a great portion of demolition material in socialist Beijing were put to use in the construction of public urban projects. And here is a few examples of urban projects that utilize bricks and rocks recycled from the city wall. So they are first railway station, just a couple examples, ice rink. And this looks new because it was renovated before the Olympics. Underground nuclear shelter. And this shelter was built at a time when China break up the relationship with the Soviet Union. And then they think that the Soviet Union is going to bomb them, so they built this. and many, many more. Almost all these urban projects were located on major thoroughfares, and some of them become important urban landmarks. In other words, through state recycling, demolition materials remain to stay in the city, which is a very different kind of geography from today, where most of the demolition material are sent to the peripheries. The social life of demolition material has changed considerably after the market reform. Nowadays, people refer to demolition materials as 建筑垃圾, or building garbage. The choice of the term reflects the fact that people no longer see use value in demolition materials. The term garbage and waste bring a lot of negative connotations. Demolition materials are now seen as a monster, which is capable of swallowing up the city, for example. And if we do not wage a war against it, our beautiful homeland will become wasteland. So it's a very, very different kind of mindset. So how does that happen? This brief genealogy of the term. The first time the term building garbage appeared, as I know of at this moment, was during a conference in 1988, where demolition material was classified as one type of urban solid waste. 4 months later, after the conference, the term building garbage appeared for the first time in People's Daily, which is China's official newspaper. In early 1990s, the Beijing city government established the Office of Building Debris under the Solid Waste Administration. And after this, building garbage began to appear in official documents. The transformation of demolition material from a resource to a garbage is associated with two sets of reform policies during the 80s, which changed the role of urban managers from demolition material allocators to producers. The physical reform of the Chinese state in the early 80s created a hard budget constraint, which forced the local state to be more responsible for local finance. As a result, Chinese local state began to shift their focus from resource redistribution to economic development. In this context, urban managers of Beijing began to lose interest in allocating demolition material to other agencies, because doing this will not bring revenues. And second, the establishment of the urban land leasehold market in 1988 transformed urban managers into demolition material producers. The newly established urban land leasehold market separate land ownership right from use right. Under this new institutional arrangement, although all urban lands are still owned by the state, its use right can now be sold in the market as a commodities. As one of the de facto urban land owners in Beijing, urban managers now can create GDP and generate revenues through land sales. The result is a second wave of large-scale urban demolition, which produced an unprecedented amount of demolition material in Beijing. It is estimated that nowadays Beijing produces 30 million tons of demolition waste each year. This number is the highest among all other cities in the world. The transformation of the urban manager leads to an overaccumulation of demolition materials in Beijing. In late 1980s, accumulation of solid waste was identified as an urgent urban problem. It was said that now the city of Beijing has been besieged by waste, and building garbage was identified as one source of the crisis. In response to the crisis, the city government established the Office of Building Debris under the Beijing Solid Waste Administration. This is the first governmental agency in Beijing that is designated specifically to be in charge of demolition materials. And after the creation of the office, the term building garbage appeared in official documents. The Office of Building Debris concerns three things. First, how to reduce dust pollution on demolition sites. Second, how to prevent dust pollution during transportation. And third, where to dispose building garbage. In other words, the concern of the official about demolition materials has changed from the problem of resource allocation to the problem of the urban environment. Urban environment should be the concern of the government, of course, but the Office of Building Debris is incapable of solving the problem. The dumping of demolition materials continues, and this has profoundly shaped the urban landscape of Beijing, especially in the urban periphery, as you can see from this picture. The Office of Building Debris is incapable of doing its job because it does not have the resources that it needs. In the current structure of a Beijing city government, most resources go to agencies that can create GDP. Support for agencies that do not create GDP, such as the Solid Waste Administration, are very trivial. The government plays a very little role in the recycling and reuse of demolition material right nowadays. Most of the jobs are carried out by informal networks of rural migrants who work as demolition workers, scavengers, and waste dealers. Through these informal networks, demolition materials are sent out to the urban fringe or places outside Beijing. In other words, the urban periphery has now become the center for the reuse, recycle, and the disposal of demolition materials. So I have argued that in the past 30 years, demolition material have been transformed from a resource to a garbage. So why this matters? So it matters because the transformation has profoundly shaped the city of Beijing. There is, first of all, this issue about the displacement of resources, which is actually one important lesson I've learned from photographer Wang Jiuliang, whose work are displayed in this room. So the story is this. In order to support urban construction, sand, rocks, and soil are dug out from hills and rivers in the countryside. And in exchange, the city sent back demolition materials to the countryside. So one of the examples of this process actually shown on that photo, just left to the door. Yes. But here I would like to point out that in addition to the displacement of resources, the transformation of the demolition material into garbage also results in, first, the stigmatization of recycling labor, and second, the privatization of territorial violence. As I mentioned before, in socialist Beijing, the labor force for building recycling mainly comes from state-owned enterprises and governmental agencies. In some cases, residents were mobilized to participate. Under this situation, there was no specific terms to describe the recycling labor force. But now, demolition material has become garbage. And the labor force of buildings recycling is given a couple of waste-associated names, such as scavengers, 拾荒者, or waste dealers, 搞废品的. I call the appearance of these new terms, new names, the stigmatization of recycling labor because terms such as 拾荒者 or 搞废品的 can invoke a lot of prejudice and stereotyping. One popular prejudice is that scavengers and waste dealers are dirty and they carry diseases. So before the Beijing Olympics in 2008, some governmental officials, such as Wang Weiping, actually proposed that the city government should persuade scavengers to leave Beijing temporarily so that Beijing can hold a green and clean Olympics. In contemporary China, the distribution of medical resources is extremely uneven between the countryside and the city, and between the urban core and the urban fringe. A lot of people living in the periphery, therefore, does not have reasonable access to medical cares. The problem associated with health and hygiene among scavengers, therefore, is associated less with the nature of their jobs, but more with the failure of the state to provide health care for people who are living in the margin. The second prejudice is that many scavengers and waste dealers are criminals. So Jing San and Liu Yihua are two researchers from the Beijing Academy of Social Sciences. When they come to categorize scavengers and waste dealers as a social group, they wrote, many scavengers are not just collect waste, but they also steal. They steal from construction site. They steal manholes, steal power cables. They steal everything belong to the public, and they steal from private household. They are very good at selling all those things they steal to make a profit, and many of them engage in a variety of crimes. In contemporary China, there's a lot of corruption in the government. Many officials, for example, take away people's houses without offering fair compensations. They sell cheap land to developers to make profit. Stealing and committing crimes apparently are not a character that distinguish scavengers and waste dealers from other social groups. The transformation of demolition material into garbage has resulted in the privatization of territorial violence on demolition sites. As I mentioned before, in socialist Beijing, in order to monopolize demolition materials, government will often build up fences around to-be demolished buildings and have police to patrol those sites. Now, they think that the demolition materials is garbage, and in fact, they are more than happy to have people come to those sites to pick things up, because this will save the problem of the government. However, demolition sites in Beijing remain a tension-charged territory. Most of the urban demolition in contemporary Beijing is carried out through what I would call a commission relationship, where a building demolition companies will pay land developers for the right to deconstruct buildings. This is especially true when the to-be demolished buildings are made of bricks and tiles, because these are the things that can be sold as commodities. Now, the government no longer offers police patrols, so the demolition company themselves have to do the dirty job by themselves. In order to protect demolition material as their own properties from scavengers and from people who they don't know, they will put guards on demolition sites. These guards will constantly checking people's movement, and if they see somebody stealing, they are going to catch that person and beat him up. Territorial violence profoundly shaped the urban experience of scavengers, who are mostly rural migrants. The scavengers I interviewed with on the demolition site often say that before they come to Beijing, they had thought that Beijing is a civilized city, it's a 文明城市, which is a slogan for the Beijing Olympics. But after they experience or witness physical violence on demolition site, they realize that Beijing is actually a jungle. And in order to survive in the jungle, they began to form social networks with people who come from the same hometown. And then they begin to distrust outsiders. The distrust between people in the informal network of building recycling and outsiders is now an invisible barrier that is difficult to overcome. So I have argued that the physical reform of the Chinese state and the establishment of the urban land leasehold market have transformed demolition material from a resource to a waste. This argument is made to emphasize my view that economic restructuring in China during the past 30 years, particularly the formation of a land-based region of accumulation, has profoundly shaped the social life of things, and thus the material culture. In addition, the findings show that waste and garbage, the term waste and garbage are socially constructed category. And by unpacking the social history and cultural meanings of waste, we can get a better perspective on today's waste problem. Second, I have shown that transformation of demolition materials into a waste has resulted in the stigmatization of the recycling labor and the privatization of territorial violence on demolition sites. Today, when people in China and Beijing talk about waste problems, most of the concerns are associated with the environment. My research showed that environment is only one dimension of the waste politics. More attention has to pay to the labor process of recycling, and of course reuse and disposal. Okay. And the environment and the society, after all, can hardly be separated. Thank you.
Thank you, Shi-yang. Well, I just realized we do have a scheduled break for 5 minutes. And so let's do that. But before we take our tea and cookies, I want to introduce, and I pardon, I beg your pardon for not doing this earlier, is to introduce to you all our main person for the seminar, Mr. Wang Jiuliang. And he's really the reason, the inspiration for this whole seminar today. Flew all the way from Beijing to join us, and he's the artist, he's the activist, he is the person behind all the, not just a photographer, but behind all these movements that push, people to pay attention to this very severe, important social, cultural, and environmental issues in Beijing today. So he's our man. If you want to grab him and have a chat, please feel free to bug him. So we will take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 3:15. Yeah? Okay. Okay, our last speaker is Mr. Mao Da, sorry. Mao Da is a PhD student and PhD candidate in the Department of History in Beijing Normal University. He's actually already finished his dissertation and ready for his defense right after this trip. So we all wish him the very best. He has been doing a lot of research on various types of environmental issues in China. And in addition to that, more interestingly, he's also been very active in various sorts of environmental NGO activism in China as well. So, for example, one of the many things he has done is he launched the Chinese Zero Mercury campaign in 2005, and he initiated Chinese NGOs network on chemicals and environmental health in 2007, and he co-founded the Citizens Initiative on Plastic Bag Policy in 2008. And since 2006, he has been devoted himself to the anti-incineration movement in China. And currently, he is an advisor to 3 very important Chinese environmental NGOs on the issues of waste, toxic chemical, and recycling. Again, let's welcome Mao Da for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Very long, lot of stuff. But the my center issue is garbage. Garbage emits a lot of toxic chemicals and relates to other, and also packaging issues. So I see garbage as a central thing to me. My topic is garbage. The relationship between garbage and NGOs, environmental NGOs. I think, like Berkeley, Beijing is the center of civil society organizations. So when I talk about Chinese environmental NGOs, it's largely a phenomenon of the city of Beijing. Garbage has always been a trouble to people, as we have seen here from the photos. But it is not until 2006 that it became a public affair in China. Before 2006, victims of landfills in Beijing and elsewhere complained and protested against garbage dump near their residence, but their voice was not heard. If better, they would get some compensation. And after that, the pollution and both the pollution and municipal waste policy and management remained as before. In 2006, the situation changed. That year, the municipal government of Beijing planned to build a municipal waste incineration plant at You-tien, a suburb area located in the northwest part of Beijing. This time, because the new victims are the middle and higher classes of urban citizens, it is more likely for the garbage problem become a public issue. Before the plan of incinerator, there is already a badly managed landfill at You-tien. If standing at the garbage hill, we can see farmers without field and migrant workers settling at its west side, and beautiful real estate area at its south side. The residents of the new real estate are either permanent residents of Beijing city or people with regular jobs in the central area of the city. Compared with their village neighbors, they have higher income and better education, and potentially have more power to fight for their rights. Outraged by the new incinerator plan, the middle-class community launched a grassroots civil rights movement, and with such movement emerged, garbage became a public affair. What happened to this movement? Briefly saying, the community activists did almost everything they can do to stop the incineration project, including information collecting, research, political lobby, media communication, legal action, and even protests in front of the Ministry of Environmental Protection. With these measures, the community successfully attracted more people's attention, and with more attention, they are more likely to win the fight. In the end, or by now, the municipal government of Beijing stopped the project and moved it to another place where people may not oppose. Moreover, the You-tien grassroots action gave a demonstration to other grassroots campaign, and it is just the beginning of a countrywide anti-incineration movement. After that, similar protests took place in other sides of Beijing city and other cities like Shanghai, Nanjing, and Wuhan. The most well-known one campaign is in Panyu, Guangzhou. On 23rd November 2009, nearly 1,000 urban citizens from Panyu protested in front of the municipal government office building of Guangzhou City. This is a rare event in China since 1949. And such events marked that garbage further became a nationwide public affair and even attracted international attention. One of the strategies of the anti-incineration community is to ally with as many people or social groups as possible. Environmental NGOs are on their target list. Before 2006, environmental NGOs were the most active force in China for environmental protection. One of the for example, from 1998 to 1999, the first membership-based environmental NGO in China, Friends of Nature, actively got involved in the anti-illegal hunting and smuggling of Tibetan antelope, an endangered animal in southwest China. Its campaign mobilized many people, especially journalists, to participate and pressure the British government to strictly control their wildlife traffic. Today, Tibetan antelope is much better protected than before. For another example, since 2003, led by Green Earth volunteers, an NGO established in 1996, launched a campaign concerning hydropower projects in southwest China. It contributed to some policy change on these projects at the central level of the Chinese government. However, in 2006, when residents of You-tien, the landfill site, approached environmental NGOs for help, environmental NGOs did not show interest nor provided them any assistance, even morally. Just tell a personal story to you. In the workshop on toxic chemicals, the You-tien residents came and told all the audience about their story. The leader of the NGO that organized the workshop had to express what she thought about the issue at the event. She didn't directly respond to the concern from residents, but just told some general principles like 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. After the workshop, the leader privately instructed her staff that we do not get involved in civil rights protection issue. If environmental NGOs regard incineration as civil rights protection issue, don't you think it is too narrow? I think so. Anyway, the residents were refused and ignored by environmental NGOs at that time. Why? Being alert to be connected to civil rights issue or self-censorship is just one reason for NGOs to stay away. Another reason is that there is an old ideology for environmental NGOs that they should focus on solutions, namely waste reduced from source or garbage separation rather than discussing about end-of-pipe methods. This is not wrong, but since 2000, environmental NGOs that has not made significant progress on what they preach on this solution side. I will talk a little bit later about this. In sum, from 2006, when grassroots activists emerged, to 2009, when garbage became a nationwide public affair, environmental NGOs previously known as parties leading public participation to environmental protection did not substantially participate to the new environmental movement on waste. What's the result of this non-participation? When community activists, independent scholars, journalists, artists like Mr. Wang Jiuliang, and public opinion leaders successfully raised the public concern over garbage problem and have gone beyond the so-called NIMBYism and civil rights protection, environmental NGOs suddenly found they are marginalized. But marginalization is not the worst. Losing trust by pollution victims, media, and other people who are concerned with public interests is what environmental NGOs don't expect to see. Of course, environmental NGO workers feel disappointed with themselves too, and realize that they should change and should pay attention to the garbage issue and should interact with community activists. In early 2009, I sensed the will of change for the first time. In March of that year, when I discussed with several community activists of You-tien in emails about the news that the suspended incinerator project may resume, the current executive director of Friends of Nature, Li Bo, actively participated to the discussion. After that, I witnessed how Friends of Nature got on board of the garbage issue and played a better role. Friends of Nature's change is significant, considering that it traditionally focused more on nature conservation. It wouldn't be problematic for them to not to work on garbage, but in Li Bo's words, we are Friends of Nature are overdrawing the public credibility. We must have the sense of pressure and recharge the credibility through our actions. Friends of Nature chose garbage, an environmental issue concerning most of the ordinary urban citizens in contemporary China, to re-establish the public credibility, and other NGOs follow soon. The change from ignorance to involvement is not the end. Effectively pushing forward municipal waste management and environmental justice is the goal. But how? Firstly, I would say that any professional environmental NGO or environmental activist concerned with garbage should stay close with people and community who are mostly influenced or has direct interest in garbage issue, because it is the common citizens who radically change municipal waste policy and management. I would like to look back in the history to support this argument. And my research is based on some sanitary management magazines and NGO archives from 1983 to 2001. Due to the increasing consumption and popularization of chemical fertilizer, the amount of municipal waste, especially the organic waste, started to grow in high speed in early 1980s. And the method to cope with the problem is just dumping them at the open ground around cities. Garbage had many impacts on the environment and people, but was not regarded as a serious problem to the public. But to the sanitary engineers and some municipal government officers, during that time, That is unacceptable. And they propose some measures to cope with the problem. Firstly, they emphasize compost should be the best disposal method. And before 1985, many sanitary engineering institutes had made a lot of efforts to test various technologies of compost. But the reality poured them cold water. Compost required organic waste, but garbage came to the compost plants was all missed. So in order to solve this problem, techno-bureaucrats further proposed garbage separation at its source. Cities like Guangzhou gave some try in citizen garbage separation in the early 1980s, but the top-down campaign did not work anymore in that area. So later in 1985, marked by the speech by the Vice Premier Li Peng, who devalued biological treatment, for example, compost, local governments turned their eyes to sanitary landfills, and garbage sorting was given up. In 1996, some change happened. In that year, environmental NGO Global Village of Beijing was established. Its leaders are elite scholars who have overseas living experience. They brought back and promoted 3 Rs idea to common citizens in China. Though Global Village of Beijing tried to persuade government offices and schools to try garbage separation, a most positive feedback was from a small-scale community called Xiang in Beijing. Its major residents are school teachers. The Xiang residents by chance watched the TV program produced by Global Village of Beijing and contacted this organization to initiate garbage sorting in their community. Today, the community is still doing the separation, though Global Village of Beijing did not contact them anymore. In 1997 and 1998, these preliminary success in Xiang and some other communities in Beijing attracted government's attention. Some local sanitary departments gave their support to these activities, but to the higher level of government officers, the new community garbage separation could be a best opportunity to resume the official scraps recycling business. But the existence of waste pickers and the informal setters means such an ambition is not going to work. Environmental NGOs saw government's involvement is a big opportunity for them and for changing the whole situation. At this moment, the Beijing city's bidding for 2008 Olympics created a green leap forward. I like to use this term. There's many green leap forwards now in China. The bidding campaign was hot in 2000. Governments find garbage separation as a tool to brand the city green and win the bidding. So the government found common grounds with environmental NGOs. Then garbage separation suddenly became a municipal government policy and spread over the city. And NGOs thought that they almost fulfilled their goal. However, the things went to the wrong way. This is a purely top-down movement, lacking grassroots support and concentrating on some superficial work like deploying garbage bins. So its result is that we have a lot of faked green communities in Beijing and on internet. Citizens make the real change. This seems to be a common sense, but in reality, we in China tend to look up to the government rather than to look down to the grassroots for solution. Environmental NGOs can be praised for acting rather than talking, but if they fail to depend on the grassroots and naively rely on government to solve problems by just giving orders, their goals wouldn't be achieved. I'm not going to say that governments do not have responsibilities or can make change too. in municipal waste management. But the way it deliver it is still up to citizens. In this sense, the community like You-tien, the civil rights movement since 2006 against incineration is the best example. As community activists were opposing incinerator projects, they were actually calling for government responsibility. And under their pressure, and citizens' voice encouraged by their campaign, the municipal waste policy and management have been changed a lot so far, including releasing more information on this disposal facility, stricter monitoring, better control of existing landfill pollution, and resuming the garbage separation scheme which was left over after the Olympics. So far, we have seen an interesting phenomenon. Self-interest-based communities push forward public municipal waste policy and management. And those environmental NGOs known as public interest-based organizations fail to effectively achieve their goals. This is happening in China now, but now not new to global environmental movements. According to Joanne Carmen's research on the difference between professional environmental NGOs and volunteer environmental initiatives in the US, the gap between the two types of environmental movements also exists. And sometimes the professional NGOs deserve criticisms too. Moreover, she argued that while professional organizations may provide a sustainable basis for environmental movements, the direction and characteristics of the movement are actually always defined by the voluntary initiatives. So the best relationship between these two movements should be mutual complementary. More interaction between them, more sustainable. The environmental movement would be more sustainable. According to my own observation on the ongoing movement for better municipal waste management in China, the interaction between professional NGOs and grassroots activists should be improved. For the grassroots side, because they desperately want to change their life and their environments, living environments, they do not lack the will to cooperate with any others, including environmental NGOs. But when they found environmental NGOs may not meet their demands immediately, they look down to environmental NGOs and think these groups are not doing what they should do. If this attitude changed, the cooperation with environmental NGOs could be better. Firstly, thinking from the side of the environmental NGOs, these NGOs as registered organizations and financially not independent, they face many practical problems to immediately jump in the new field. Secondly, environmental NGOs do need to think broadly on garbage issue, not just erasing one incinerator at one site, but the question of how the city deal with its garbage problem. So, if I could recommend, grassroots activists should give more patience to environmental NGOs' work. For the environmental NGO side, they cannot ignore the demand of grassroots anymore. But how to respond to that is still a question. Chinese environmental NGOs emphasize on 3 Rs, but relevant work couldn't be disconnected with watchdogging, incineration, or any other disposal methods. Not just because the end-of-pipe technology relates to the policies and for garbage reduce and separation, but also this is what the people are mostly concerned with. Environmental NGOs can influence people only by firstly showing a good performance on what the people think most important. Many environmental NGOs are still avoiding confrontation with incineration issue and pollution victims. Sometimes it is because they are afraid of risks. But sometimes it is because they have not found effective methods to act. As what we can see from the grassroots movement, the major opponents of the community activists is not the incineration developer, but the government and the pro-incineration specialists. So if environmental NGOs want to play a better role, they must focus on how to make the governments be more responsible and do more research by their own to clarify scientific controversy. These are both what the grassroots activists urgently needed. But why environmental NGOs should meet the demand from the grassroots? In the US, professional NGOs have more power to lobby politicians and lawmakers to change policy and environmental practice. Chinese environmental NGOs are pursuing the similar role, but as to the ability of lobbying, they are even weaker than the grassroots activists. Some grassroots leaders like Huang Xiaoshan, the left side person, and Ba Shu and Ying Taobai on the right side. These two guys from Guangzhou, these from Beijing, they are at the front of interaction with governments and mass media. Environmental NGOs want to do the similar things, but they are not eligible yet. So a practical strategy for environmental NGOs are to serve or facilitate rather than to lead. They need to change what they are used to do. I'm not afraid that environmental NGOs will lose their principles during this process. I believe through networking with grassroots activists and pollution victims, the environmental NGOs idea has better chance to be accepted by more people. And when I am talking here, my environmental NGO friends are visiting an incineration polluted place in Jiangsu province. They interview villagers and also listen to incinerator developers. They are also going to visit local governments to listen to them. I would like to pay my respect to them here. Just forgot to put the names of the organization. It's called Green Beagles. This picture shows that they are in a village. This lady and the gentleman at the left side are the village officers. When our friends come to their village and interview villagers, they immediately came to intervene, but they have to listen to, this is a chance for them to listen to the villagers about the pollution of the incinerator. That's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, I was told that all the four of us, have to sit here. By the table for the photo opportunity of some sort. After this.
Here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So should we wait for Joshua to come back before we start again? Oh, poor him. Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Okay, thank you, Mao-da, for your wonderful presentation. And again, I'm supposed to say a few words before we open up to the discussion. And I would just say my very immediate response to these three most interesting papers, just after listening to this. Since none of you guys follow your abstract at all. So anyway, so I have, I think this is very interesting presentations. And I have one sort of a speculative type of questions for the first two presentations on the garbage. And then I have one more specific question for Mao-da for your NGO activism presentation. So, you know, one thing that really strikes me when I listen to your stories, these two, is how you both emphasize on the low social status, the stigmatized image of garbage collectors, workers, and in terms of their actual income level, benefits, and social status. And in both eras, you know, during Mao and in the reform era. And then there seems to be some disagreement between you two about whether their status has declined even further in Shi-yang's presentation, or maybe we should assume it has never been very high anyway. But then, you know, instead of thinking about higher, lower social status, whether this is a contradiction of some sort or not, I think it's probably a question of a labor regime here. It's like, what kind of labor are we talking about here? You know, in both cases, it seems to me, during Mao's and during the reform era, they are always in some sort of an informal part of even under the planned economy. They are into the informal sector of some sort. And so, you know, that in itself, I think is an interesting question. What kind of informal sector are we talking about here under a planned economy? Whether it's possible, or what kind of informal arrangement can we find in the so-called planned economy, yeah? But then that's actually not my question. My question is that informality in itself probably is not even enough, because we talk about economy, we still ignore your concern about the social. Yeah, so we still want to see how we can combine their economic status and their social status in using another conceptual framework. And I found in both cases, these are really some undesirable people dealing with undesirable things. For example, you know, in one of the pictures you show, it has some characters there in the poster, and it says, well, who's actually collecting this garbage? You know, if they are not getting the benefits, so who are they? Who are these workers who seem to have fallen out of the Danwei welfare system, who seem to be not being taken care of as much as formal workers working for a steel mill or something? So that reminds me of my research on these private property owners in the city during the Cultural Revolution and before. They are politically disgraced people. They are the people who are labeled as rightists. They are counter-revolutionaries. They are the Heiwulei. They are the five black categories. These are the politically undesirable types who actually no one feels obligated to in terms of providing good jobs, stable, good income, or housing, or any other benefits. Probably this kind of undesirable people under Mao as politically undesirable are being wonderfully matched with this undesirable type of job. So that's my suspicion. And then, so you tell me whether this is totally just, you know, not making sense at all. And then, because, you know, I just want to make a story out of it. And then during the reform era, we see different kind of undesirable people, which is illegal immigrants to the city. Or in one of the stories, you say, well, you know, the officials blame them for having too many children. So these probably are family planning violators. They actually sneak out of their jurisdiction in order to avoid all these restrictions on their in the desire of having more than one child. So they are sort of, because in these illegal immigrant communities in a big city, you actually see a lot of them come to the city in order to escape from the family planning, child number control. So these are people who are outside of the system and then ended up finding some kind of work in the undesirable sector. So I just wonder whether we can do some kind of matching there. And on top of all that, and Shi-yang, as a geographer, I asked about undesirable space. You know, whether we can match these undesirable people dealing with undesirable goods and things, and now also being pushed in undesirable place. And for historians, I wonder about undesirable time. These are the people in this sector at the time when, the meaning of waste is completely changed. From the morality of focusing on saving, reuse, it's not really necessarily an environmental thing. I see it's a moral, socialist morality of, building socialist China, saving everything we can to contribute to the nation, and so on. So that kind of undesirable, situation, matching time, space, people, and goods, is what I gather from the stories. But then, I saw our historian and seem to be agree on this. That's why my immediate response to this. And with the NGO, I have a very, very naive question. I found these environmental issues divided into several categories. Garbage is one, river protection being another, animals, or these great so-called fauna, these are sort of very cherished type of animals, or your panda, or your, those Tibetan antelope. And, but they are actually quite connected if you look at environment as a complete, more of a coherent system, ecological system. We believe that they are all connected. But in the NGO work, you have to divide them somehow. But garbage, has a lot to do with river pollution, for example. I just wonder what your views are on how, on the one hand you have the informed, these are very organized work, but then on the other, the issue itself is very difficult to divide. And also, the last story you tell about these villagers, these are not really, they don't even seem to think that they are of any kind of organization, it seems to me. They have a very immediate issue right into their face. They are directly affected by it. They want to do something about it. And so there are various type of mobilization, but no organization in that sense around Chinese villages these days. So how do you view them? These kind of mobilization and their characters, are they really, temporary, issue-focused, and not necessarily as political as outside observers would like to see? So these are my thoughts, so for you to comment on. Or we should open up to the floor, depends on what you guys want to say.
Well, those are really, your comments on our stuff is really helpful, and I think we were talking about a lot of this related stuff at lunch today. So I think who is doing the dirty work in the 60s and 70s specifically is something I'm still trying to get a good answer to. I do think there are some undesirables in there coming from what might have been formerly higher class backgrounds. My guess is they mostly end up being managers in the system. They have skills that I think my sense is, and I'm not sure yet, but my sense is that it's legacies from before. It's people who did this dirty work before, and it's their children. And I don't think you're getting a lot of people falling into this system that way. So. But I do think that there is that it was a sector that was tainted by being involved in trade that was seen as somehow petty bourgeois and inappropriate, for sure. And I don't know. The really, really interesting comments. I wish you could write them down.
It's really shared
but.
speculation on my part.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been trying to figure out whether or not, I do think that it's, I'm not sure how much more than informal is going on here. I don't know how much informal trade really, if you look at, I've got some documents and maybe I've got to look at them, but I think they actually paid local neighborhood people who were not within the business better than they paid people who were formally the employees of the Uzuhui Shogongsi. To promote them to get involved in the work. So I think there really was, they were formal members of the Danwei in every way, and yet the quality of their lives was miserable. I don't know what.
What's the vein of that sentence? You were saying
Okay, so yeah, and the system remains. I mean, it is a marginal system in terms of downway. I mean, so certain goods were centralized very early on: copper, aluminum, rubber. Ferrous moves in and out. Fiber was later. So what would happen is if you're a collector of fibers, like paper or cloth or whatever that's used for paper making, you wouldn't necessarily be responding to a central government dictate about how much to produce or how much to sell off, or there were price controls, but there weren't necessarily planned targets, and you might be collecting it only in your district or locally, and you wouldn't necessarily have a kind of be upping it all the time to the center. And therefore, so there were collectors in local areas that were not necessarily directly part of the downway system. They were kind of like given permission to buy and sell. Those people that were paid better than people that were actually within the formal system, as far as I know.
But who were they paid by? That was my question.
They would be paid by their local, I believe by their local government. But
I have one comment on what Professor You-tien Hsing. I have one comment, and then I have a question for Mao-era. My comment is that I don't see the comparison between the Huaifunzi of the Mao era and the socially undesirables that we're talking about, because in the former case, it was government policy relentlessly, cruelly, arbitrarily focused on people who were classified as the Huaifunzi. I don't sense anything like that here. This is a question of people being regarded by fellow citizens as socially undesirable. So I think there's a profound difference between the two. And for Mao-era, I have a question. If the NGOs, the environmental NGOs and communities become closer and act more closely together, wouldn't that encourage government reaction in the form of kind of hostility and fear of something political emerging out of their coming together?
If they...
如果这个 NGO 跟 公民合起来，可能政府单位会怕他们一起在政治方面做不太好的事情。
Yeah, this is what environmental NGOs were afraid of. But if they are not going to overcome these barriers, why they exist, or just take money from sponsors and leave a comfortable, do some easy job.
That's a very powerful answer.
Yeah, I know. So the situation has already come to a time that NGOs cannot stay away. So in practice, I think this is a dynamic process now. Also, for Professor Hsing's questions, for the connection between different topics and also the interaction with villagers. These are dynamic things now. It's up, and environmental NGO need to think more wisely to overcome these barriers. But there are some good models already. One successful NGO, environmental NGO in China, focus on environmental information releasing. And this is what environmental NGOs did not do before. And they use reliable sources, information from the government itself, and also from the corporations, and also from academic papers. So this I think, reduce the risks for them to be yeah. But sometimes I think For the incineration issue, some NGOs are over self-censorship. It automatically, at the beginning, it automatically think this is just related to self-interest rights protection, and may or there's some there's a red line there in the government, but there is no. And the things later prove that there's no red lines there. And I think in the future, if these similar things emerge, NGOs could select to do more research, and as a party to clarify controversies for both sides. That's already helpful for the victims, because they are the weaker side in terms of scientific knowledge or power of speaking. Yeah.
Okay, so Max and then our
Yeah, because I haven't made a response to you. So yes, just let me make it very brief. For the case of demolition material during the socialist period, it's very different. Because it's, as I know of right now, it was not considered as a garbage. So the people who are actually recycling and to demolish buildings, they are not the undesirable people. They are. For the case of City Wall, for example, those labor force come from school teachers, college students, who are actually very proud of what they do. And during the socialist period, though, the undesirable people are actually sent to do the job of producing construction materials. For example, the bricks. It is a very considered as a very bad job because to manufacturing bricks, you need to stay in a room that is super hot. They need to use the oven and then to heat all the things. So during the socialist periods, the rightists are sent to concentration camp, and then those concentration camps are the places where all those bricks were produced. And right now the situation is kind of different right now. So what I think I was trying to argue is the kind of social status of those people who actually provide the labor for recycle, reuse, and disposal become much lower. But are they undesirable people? I think it depends on who you ask. If you are asking the resident of Beijing, yeah, of course, nobody want to touch them. Nobody want to go to those urban villages where all the recyclers live. But if you're looking at people from provinces such as Henan and Anhui, everybody want to go to Beijing to pick up garbage truck, because that's one of the few ways they can kind of make their living better. Yes, sorry.
Sure. And Max, and then Jennifer, and yeah, Jim, hi.
All right, I just had a question, a pretty basic one. When did you, this is for Shi-yang and Josh mostly, when did you begin to see the appearance of the word environment, like 环境, in the documents you look through? Because it seems that part of the discourse as it shifts from materials to waste, is there's a parallel concern or emergence of concern with something called the environment. And how does that develop? I mean, it's probably a huge question, but I'm just curious if you can sort of pinpoint it or if you noticed it.
I think for my case, the document I was looking at, you see these terms, 市容环境, the urban environment. You see them since the 90s, but before that, you don't. I don't see people use this term too much, and what interesting here is the use of the term 环境, the environment, is beginning by the government for the of the Office of Building Debris. But right now, what happened is because a lot of people in the business of building recycling. Because if they tell everybody that other people that they are recycling bricks and recycling rebars, people are going to call them, oh, you are 拾荒者, you are scavengers, or you are waste dealer, 搞废品的. And it's really, it will be a problem, because if you tell other people that you are in the business of recycling, you have a lot of trouble. For example, difficult for you to get bank loans. Yeah, if you tell the bank you are recycling waste, they are not going to offer you any loans, and they are not going to tell their relatives that they are back to the hometown because they think it's a shame. So what happens is, if you right now you are asking a person, so what's your job? He's going to tell you, oh, I'm in the business of green building materials. so right now all those recyclers, they have those kind of name tag says this is environmental technology company, building material companies. So it's kind of the adaptation of the term environment by those waste dealers and recyclers. Yes.
I would love to give you an answer to that. I don't have a good one yet. But I do think that around the time that they're doing international, getting World Bank loans for landfilling, for sanitary landfill, I think there's definitely environmental, like the environment comes into those discussions. I'm not sure if, I think it probably appears in some places even before that in the late 70s or early 80s, but by then it's definitely part of the whole sanitary landfill discourse.
I first wanted to thank you for the presentations. I thought they were really all very interesting. And I guess I had two things that kind of struck out at me. One was, it's interesting to me that all of you talk about Beijing, and I wondered if there's something about Beijing, is it just completely by coincidence that you're just talking about Beijing, or is there anything atypical or typical about Beijing? That was my first question. And then the second one was, you all talk about sort of the stigmatization of the recyclers and the garbage pickers and all of that. But if you sort of think about it, I guess demolition materials also has a lot to do with development and with real estate, especially in current day situation, but also in socialist China, I thought. And I made an intuitive leap in terms of, well, is there anything informal sector, this whole community of people with very little power? Is there any connection to corruption or some sort of illicit kinds of networks of people? Even under socialism, I thought there are resources that they are struggling for, that they're trying to collect and amass together. Maybe it's not corruption because it was so formalized and very tightly controlled, but was there any kind of sort of illicit kinds of networking or contracts between SOEs and certain resource collection or anything like that? I'm not sure. Again, I'm making an intuitive leap, but those are the two questions that came to mind.
Okay, I forgot what the first comment was.
Beijing.
Oh, well, I think they can answer that probably better. For me, it's really opportunism. It's just where I was. But obviously, Beijing also has one of the strictest hukou laws in all of China, and so I think the level of discrimination and violence against migrants that you saw, like a really state-perpetrated violence against migrants in the 90s, especially, which is what I originally kind of was interested, why I was paying so much attention. I think it was stronger in Beijing than pretty much any other city. This is kind of similar to I don't really know how much corruption there. I think. I mean, and it gets also to your comment about whether they're Huaifunza. I mean, I think it depends on how you define Huaifunza. I mean, if you're thinking about intellectuals, then we're not talking about Huaifunza. If you're thinking about in business communities, those people that were seen as not conforming to policies that were trying to restrict people's business activities and who had skills and knowledge about how to do business differently and tried to continue to do that, those people were branded as Huaifunza. Even if they had no, like at least in what I'm looking at, names are coming up and these people are clearly getting cracked down on. And these are people without very much power at all. And I don't know if what goes on with those type of people is that different from what goes on if you don't have a hukou in 1990. And I think it's a very similar reaction of the formal sector of the people who are working within the government's system saying, you make networks outside the system. You're undermining my profit or my power, and I'm going to stop it. And I'll do it by branding you as illegal. And so I think there is maybe a continuity in some parts of the Huaifunzi definition there. And when it comes to the people that I see getting most abused by the system, besides those kinds of people who get cracked down on, I think, early on, I mean, the most miserable people I'm finding are like the women who are given the horrible dirty work. Like the men go and do metal scrap, right? Still kind of true today. Metal scrap is a man's job. You know, it's like iron and steel and copper, and the women are like doing this really dirty, contaminating stuff and getting sick and getting badly paid for it.
I'm Jim Caldwell. I did a postdoc at the Center for Chinese Studies here back a long time ago. And I'm under Joyce Colgren. But the thing and I'm in organizational studies, so what struck me in your talks is that you all observed that everyone agrees in 3 R's, and everyone agrees on Chuanchuar full cycle systems. Yet, and even when I was back in Beijing, they had a Wujiang Sumei Yundong back in the 80s, which is about very environmental, like make things beautiful and make them, you know, whole systems approach. And yet, despite that idealism or that shared vision, it seems like Chinese organizations succumb to the same flaws that every other organization in civilization has, which is their old structures prevent them from doing what they want to do. That they can't, that each one is doing what their narrow piece of it or their specialized focus, but they're not getting together on what they all agree on that they should do and make it a holistic solution that everyone can get on board with. That's what I sensed was coming out of your talks, but is that right, in your view?
Yeah, I think your observation is true. But one reason is this is not long. The issue is not long. It's just that 10 years history, but there are some stops. NGOs didn't consistently engage in the garbage issue. So when the civil, grassroots campaign emerged, and we jumped into the issue. And but yeah, of course, some NGOs focus on the disposal side, and some the source separation, and some like packaging, more upstream. But when they are focused on one area, I think NGO workers have the sense to be a holistic. I think this is also a dynamic process. We need to find some opportunity to connect these different areas, and also connect it to a climate change issue. But like, for example, several days we organize because we have we successfully linked the incineration to climate change, CDM, because the CDM supports incineration and landfills. So we find an opportunity to connect it to global climate change organizations. So I think through this process, it would be more holistic. But currently, it's true. Yeah.
My name is Graham Bullock, and I'm a PhD candidate here at Berkeley in environmental science policy management. And I also worked in China for a couple years in both Beijing and Southwest China, and know Libo pretty well from those days. And just have two quick comments and then a question for all of you. The first is just on this Shi-yang's point about this sort of transformation of the word of environment. Like when I was back in Lijiang, Yunnan, last summer, I was talking with one of the villagers that I had worked with back then, and he was telling me, "What are you doing now?" And he said, "I'm doing 环境保護." And I was like, "Oh, really? What's in Lijiang?" And I was like, "Oh, well, what's that?" And it took a little while to figure out, but he was actually driving one of the trucks, or the garbage trucks, around the old town of Lijiang, picking up the garbage, and he called it 环境保護. So it was kind of that is the same kind of thing you're talking about. And then just a more sort of comment that your sort of comment about the 3 R's. I was in Patagonia the other day, and they have this new thing. They're adding a 4th R, which is repair. And you can send in bring in your broken zip or whatever, and they'll repair it for a small fee or whatever. And when I saw it, it immediately made me think of China. And then when I saw your slides going back to the 50s and 60s, Josh, sort of thought, so whether or not that repair kind of thought, is relevant to your research, I thought might be interesting. But my question is about GDP. And I think both of you mentioned GDP, and Josh, you in particular mentioned this idea of industrialization without consumerism. I just would like to ask to elaborate a little more on that. And in particular, like, before the reform era, so you saw this change, right? Where they were focused more on GDP. But what were they focused on before? I mean, they were also focused on GDP, right? And so is that really what is causing the change, or is there some other, perhaps deeper change in the administrative geography or whatever that caused it, and not specifically GDP? And then a question to Mao-da into the future now. There's this green GDP talk in China, and focused on sustainable development and harmony, et cetera. Have you seen that affect at all work on waste and incinerization? Sort of this trying to move away from a focus on GDP in the current era. So, thank you.
I'm gonna go first. Yes. For the GDP question, yes. During the socialist period, they put a lot of effort to boost up industrial production. That's very true. But I think I think this is my fault. I didn't make it clear. When I say local officials right now care more about GDP than distribution, I mean during the socialist period they were trying. What they do is they try to fulfill the production target mandate by upper officials from the upper administrations. And right now, you don't see this kind of thing anymore. Right now, if you want to be promoted as an official, you need to talk about how much GDP I create for my jurisdiction, and how much employment I provide, and how much investment I got. So it's kind of a change of mindset. But you are true to say that. You are correct to say that during the socialist period, yes, I do think. Actually, there's something I learned from You-tien's class. Yes, the Communist Party. Yes, they it's not all about ideology. It's about expanding production. That's true.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, I would love to. I mean, I think it's a really good challenge to how to describe the socialist period more accurately. But I think certainly, I mean, industrialization without consumption is where I'm kind of at, which is where, it's like it's all about industry, but it's not really promoting or allowing for consumption to be kind of motivated and then fed right into kind of create a demand-driven production engine, which moves goods more readily, et cetera, et cetera. And so until you put that into the mix, then I think what the aims do remain different. They remain about targets. They remain about fulfilling those kinds of things, as opposed to like, okay, where's the demand driving us, and let's just go meet it.
About green GDP, I look forward to seeing if there is a organization focused on this concept. That will be a very overarching program and relates many things together. But currently not yet. But as NGOs already focus on garbage issue or some specific problems on the ground, I think we have the sense that everything we are doing, or which relates to the especially the end of pipe disposal, because there's many discussion on what kind of technology we can choose to solve the waste problem, including the grassroots community. They are also proposing many technology to the government. But as NGOs, I think the difference between NGOs and grassroots is we are not talking openly the green GDP. I think this is different levels, it's upper levels. But on the ground, we have the sense that to have enough arguments or information to let people know the disposal technology will not solve the problem, will lead the topic to green GDP things. And currently, I think climate change issue already is connected to our groundwork. And I think carbon emission and green GDP is, I think it's just one thing, two sides.
Okay, we can take one last question. Okay, so well, we will thank our panelists for wonderful presentations. And also, by the way, Shi-yang is the person we should all thank for his organizing this seminar. So thank you, Shi-yang. And we will have a film showing at 5.
Film at 5, and tomorrow afternoon 4 here. Wang Julian is going to give a talk. So please stay tonight and come tomorrow afternoon.
More cookies too. Thank you.